The morning air carried a bitter chill that seemed to seep through the windows of Ravenswood Manor, matching the ice that had settled around Helena's heart. 4 days had passed since Robert's funeral, 4 days since she'd watched them lower her husband of 43 years into the cold earth. She sat at the kitchen table where they'd shared countless breakfasts, her arthritic fingers wrapped around a porcelain teacup that had grown cold long ago. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times when she heard Dylan's footsteps on the hardwood floors. Her son appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of cold determination she'd never seen before. In his hands, he carried a thick manila envelope and a briefcase that seemed to weigh more than its contents should allow. "We need to talk, Mother." His voice carried none of the warmth she remembered from the boy who used to run to her with scraped knees and broken dreams. Helena set down her teacup with deliberate care. "Of course, darling. Would you like some coffee? You need to pack your things and leave today." The words hit her like physical blows. "This house belongs to me and Isabel now." For a moment, Helena couldn't process what she was hearing. The kitchen seemed to tilt, the familiar surroundings becoming foreign and threatening. "I don't understand. Your father's will." "Dad changed his will 6 months ago." Dylan opened the briefcase and withdrew a stack of legal documents. "He left everything to me, the house, the investments, even your trust fund." He placed the papers on the table between them like a barrier. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, but Isabel and I have plans for the property." Helena's hands trembled as she reached for the documents. The legal language swam before her eyes, but she could make out enough to understand the devastating reality. According to these papers, Robert had indeed changed his will, leaving her with nothing but a small monthly allowance and the requirement that she vacate the family home immediately. "This can't be right," she whispered. "Robert would never... wouldn't he?" Isabel's voice cut through the air like a blade as she materialized in the doorway. Dylan's wife looked immaculate as always, her dark hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, her smile as sharp as broken glass. "Robert was very concerned about your mental state in his final months. The early signs of dementia can be so troubling for family members to witness." "I don't have dementia." Helena's voice cracked with the force of her protest. "Of course not, dear." Isabel's tone dripped with false sympathy. "But Robert worried about your ability to manage such a large estate. This way, Dylan can take care of everything while ensuring you're properly looked after." She gestured towards the driveway where a taxi was already waiting. "I've arranged for you to stay at Sunset Manor. It's a lovely facility, and you'll be much more comfortable there." Helena felt the walls of her world collapsing inward. Sunset Manor was the county nursing home, a place where forgotten elderly residents spent their final years watching television and waiting for visits that rarely came. "You can't do this. This is my home. Actually, we can." Dylan's voice had grown harder, more distant. "You have 2 hours to pack your personal belongings. The taxi will wait." As if in a nightmare, Helena found herself moving through the house that had been her sanctuary for 4 decades, stuffing a lifetime of memories into a single suitcase. Her hands shook as she folded the blue dress Robert had bought her for their last anniversary, as she wrapped her mother's jewelry in tissue paper, as she selected which photographs would accompany her into exile. In the bedroom she'd shared with Robert, surrounded by the detritus of her dismantled life, Helena's mind drifted back to the funeral. She remembered how Isabel had whispered to Reverend Peterson during the service, her words carefully chosen but clearly audible to those nearby. "It's such a blessing that Robert made proper arrangements." Helena's been showing signs of confusion lately. Just yesterday she forgot where she put her medication. The lie had been delivered with such conviction that even Helena had momentarily questioned herself. But she remembered her medication clearly. Isabel had been managing it for the past month, insisting it was too confusing for Helena to handle alone. Another memory surfaced Robert's last 3 days. When he'd seemed unusually agitated and weak, Isabel had explained that he was having trouble remembering to take his blood pressure medication, but something about her explanation had felt wrong. Robert was meticulous about his health, had been taking the same medications for years without issue. Helena paused in her packing, her fingers closing around her jewelry box. As she lifted it, something rattled inside that shouldn't have been there. Hidden beneath the velvet lining was a small brass key and a piece of paper in Robert's careful handwriting. "If something happens to me, Box 247, First National Bank, password Helena 1955. Her heart began to race. Robert had hidden this from her, which meant he'd expected trouble. The key felt warm in her palm, heavy with possibility and dread. "Mother." Dylan's voice echoed up the stairs. "The taxi is waiting." Helena slipped the key into her pocket and finished packing with newfound purpose. Whatever Robert had left for her in that safety deposit box, it might be her only hope of understanding what had happened to her life. As the taxi pulled away from Ravenswood Manor, Helena watched her home disappear behind a veil of autumn trees. But instead of despair, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: determination. Robert had left her a message, a lifeline. She would find out what secrets lay hidden in Box 247, and she would uncover the truth about her husband's death and her son's betrayal. The old Helena Ravenswood might have accepted defeat, might have spent her remaining years as a forgotten resident of Sunset Manor, but the woman who clutched that brass key had steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. The game was far from over. The Sunset Motel stood like a monument to faded dreams on the outskirts of town, its neon sign flickering erratically in the evening gloom. Helena paid for a week's stay with money from her emergency fund, money she'd hidden from everyone, including Robert. The room smelled of disinfectant and disappointment, but it would serve her purposes. She waited until morning to visit First National Bank, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she might discover. The young teller barely glanced at her identification before leading her to the safety deposit box vault. Box 247 was larger than she'd expected, and when she lifted the lid, her breath caught in her throat. Inside lay a USB drive, photocopies of legal documents, and a bank statement showing an account in her name with a balance of $180,000, money she'd known nothing about. But it was the USB drive that drew her attention, labeled in Robert's handwriting, for Helena, the truth. Back in her motel room, Helena's laptop, a gift from Dylan last Christmas that she'd barely learned to use, hummed to life. The video file opened to reveal Robert sitting in his study, looking haggard and older than his 70 years. The timestamp showed it had been recorded just 2 weeks before his death. "My dearest Helena," Robert's voice filled the small room, and she had to grip the edge of the desk to steady herself. "If you're watching this, then my worst fears have come true, and I'm no longer here to protect you." Helena's hand flew to her mouth as Robert continued, his words delivering hammer blows to her understanding of reality. "I've discovered that Isabel has been slowly poisoning me, not with traditional poison, but by manipulating my medication. She's been removing my blood pressure pills from their bottle and replacing them with placebos. For someone with my cardiac history, the sudden withdrawal of medication could easily trigger a fatal stroke or heart attack." The image wavered as Robert leaned forward, his eyes intense with urgency. "I've been investigating her background. Helena, her real name is Isabella Martinez, and she's done this before. She was fired from St. Mary's Psychiatric Hospital 3 years ago for suspected euthanasia of elderly patients. The official reason was medication errors, but the pattern was clear to those who looked closely enough." Helena paused the video, her mind reeling. She thought of all the times Isabel had insisted on managing Robert's medications, claiming it was too confusing for him to handle multiple prescriptions. She thought of how grateful she'd been for her daughter-in-law's help, how she'd praised Isabel's nursing background to their friends. She pressed play, and Robert's voice continued, "Dylan doesn't know. I'm certain of that. She's manipulated him psychologically, isolated him from us, made him dependent on her approval. She's brilliant at what she does. Helena. She identifies wealthy, vulnerable families and inserts herself into their lives like a parasite." The video showed Robert holding up documents, bank records, employment histories, newspaper clippings. "I've traced her to at least 3 other cities. In each place, she entered into relationships with wealthy men who died suddenly, leaving her everything. The total amount she's stolen is over $2 million, and that's only what I could verify." Helena's hands shook as she reached for the photocopied documents in the box. The evidence was overwhelming: death certificates, insurance payouts, marriage licenses under different names: Isabella Martinez, Isabel Cross, Bella Morrison, the same woman with the same modus operandi. "I've prepared everything you'll need to prove her guilt," Robert continued. "The real will is in this box, along with the account I set up for your protection. I've also contacted a journalist named Emma Sterling who specializes in exposing this type of crime. If something happens to me, find her." The video ended with Robert's final words, "I love you, Helena. You're stronger than you know. Don't let them win." Helena sat in the growing darkness of her motel room, surrounded by the evidence of a conspiracy that had destroyed her life and murdered her husband. But alongside the grief and rage, she felt something else growing a cold, calculating fury that would fuel her quest for justice. She found Emma Sterling's contact information in the documents and dialed the number with steady fingers. When the journalist answered, Helena's voice was calm and clear. "Ms. Sterling, my name is Helena Ravenswood. I believe you've been waiting for my call." The meeting took place the next morning at a diner 20 miles from town. Emma Sterling was younger than Helena had expected, perhaps 40, with intelligent green eyes and prematurely gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She listened without interruption as Helena explained everything, occasionally taking notes in a worn leather notebook. "I've been tracking this pattern for 2 years, Emma said when Helena finished. "The woman you know as Isabel Cross is one of the most successful Black Widow killers I've ever investigated. She's careful, patient, and incredibly skilled at manipulation." "How many people has she killed?" "That I can prove 7. But I suspect the real number is much higher." Emma leaned forward, her expression grave. "The problem is evidence. She's never been caught because she's smart enough to vary her methods and patient enough to build believable relationships. By the time her victims realize what's happening, it's too late." "But we have Robert's video, his research, which would be dismissed as the paranoid delusions of a sick man. If Isabel's lawyer is worth his fee..." Emma's honesty was brutal, but necessary. "We need more. We need to catch her in the act or get her to confess." Helena studied the younger woman's face. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we give her what she wants most, another victim. You." The plan was dangerous, perhaps foolish, but it was the only option that offered hope for justice. As Helena returned to her motel room that evening, she felt the weight of Robert's USB drive in her pocket. He had prepared her for this battle, had given her the weapons she needed to fight. But as she reviewed the video one more time, a detail caught her attention that she'd missed before. In the background of one shot, barely visible through the study window, was Dylan's car in the driveway. And Dylan was standing beside it, talking on his cell phone. The timestamp showed this was taken at 11 p.m., long after any normal business call would have ended. Helena enhanced the image on her laptop screen as much as she could. Though she couldn't hear the conversation, Dylan's body language suggested an argument or urgent discussion. She remembered that Robert's life insurance policy had been increased just 3 months before his death. Dylan had handled the paperwork himself, claiming it was a smart financial move. The possibility that her son might not be as innocent as she'd believed hit her like a physical blow. The widow and mother in her wanted to reject the idea entirely, but the woman who had learned to see clearly in the past few days forced herself to consider the evidence. Dylan knew about the insurance increase. Dylan had been at the house at unusual hours in the weeks before Robert's death. Dylan had been ready with legal documents the morning after the funeral, as if he'd prepared them in advance. Helena closed her laptop and stared out the motel window at the empty parking lot. Tomorrow, she would begin the most dangerous game of her life. But tonight, she mourned not just for Robert, but for the son she thought she knew. The key Robert had left her had unlocked more than a safety deposit box. It had opened a door to a truth darker than she could have imagined. And she was only beginning to understand how deep the conspiracy against her family truly went. Helena found the cottage 3 days later, a small Victorian house on Maple Street that sat empty and forgotten behind a curtain of overgrown ivy. The for rent sign was faded and weathered, suggesting the property had been available for months. When she called the number, the landlord seemed almost surprised that anyone was interested. "Moonlight Cottage," she murmured to herself as she signed the lease, using money from Robert's secret account. The name felt right, appropriate for a place where women could find refuge in their darkest hours. The cottage required work, cleaning, basic repairs, fresh paint, but Helena threw herself into the task with energy she hadn't felt in years. Each room she restored felt like a small victory against the forces that had tried to destroy her. She wasn't just creating a home, she was building a fortress. Margaret Chen answered Helena's advertisement for a groundskeeper with the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily. At 55, Margaret carried herself with the quiet dignity of a person who had survived betrayal and emerged stronger. During their interview over coffee, Helena learned that Margaret's daughter had systematically stolen her entire retirement fund over the course of 2 years, using a combination of forged documents and emotional manipulation. "She convinced me I was getting confused about money," Margaret said, her voice steady but her eyes reflecting old pain. "Said she was helping me manage my finances. By the time I realized what was happening, my savings account was empty, and she'd taken out a reverse mortgage on my house." Helena felt an immediate kinship with this woman who understood the particular cruelty of family betrayal. "How did you survive? 1 day at a time. And by promising myself I'd never let anyone make me feel helpless again." Margaret's smile was small but genuine. "I learned that sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the family we're born into." Helena hired Margaret on the spot, not just for her gardening skills but for her wisdom and her understanding of what it meant to rebuild a life from nothing. Dr. Hawking. Lily Foster arrived at Moonlight Cottage on a rainy Thursday evening, her 8-year-old daughter Sophie clinging to her hand and a single suitcase holding everything they owned. Lily was thin to the point of frailty, with hollow eyes that darted constantly to the windows and doors as if expecting pursuit. "I saw your advertisement at the women's shelter," Lily explained as Helena led them inside. "I can pay rent, but not much. I'm a physician, but I can't practice right now." Sophie hadn't spoken since they arrived, but she accepted the hot chocolate Margaret prepared and curled up in the living room's oversized armchair like a small animal seeking shelter. Over the following days, Helena learned Lily's story in fragments. Dr. Lily Foster had been a successful internal medicine physician until she married Dr. Marcus Foster, a surgeon whose charm masked a controlling and violent nature. The abuse had escalated over 3 years, culminating in a beating that left Lily hospitalized and Marcus arrested. But his family's connections and expensive lawyers had reduced the charges to a misdemeanor, and his threats against Sophie had forced Lily underground. "He has visitation rights," Lily whispered one evening as they sat in the cottage's kitchen. "The court doesn't understand that he's dangerous. They see a respected surgeon who claims his wife is mentally unstable." Helena saw an opportunity in Lily's medical knowledge. "I need to ask you something about my husband's death. He had a heart condition and was taking blood pressure medication. If someone stopped his medication suddenly—" Lily's expression grew serious. Sudden withdrawal of antihypertensive medication in a patient with cardiac history could absolutely trigger a fatal event. The rebound hypertension can cause stroke, heart attack, or cardiac arrest. It would look completely natural, especially if the victim had a documented heart condition. And how long would it take? Depending on the medication and the patient's condition, anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks. The beauty of it, from a killer's perspective, is that it would be almost impossible to prove unless someone specifically looked for evidence of medication withdrawal. Helena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. Robert's agitation in his final days, his complaints of dizziness and chest pain that Isabel had dismissed as anxiety, it all made terrible sense. That night, Helena called Emma Sterling with an update on her progress. The journalist had spent the week digging deeper into Isabel's background and had disturbing news to share. "I found 2 more victims," Emma reported. An elderly widower in Ohio and a wealthy divorcee in Tennessee. Both died of apparent heart failure within 6 months of meeting women who match Isabel's description. The total we can verify is now 9 victims and over $3 million in stolen assets. "Has she noticed that I'm fighting back?" "Oh, she's noticed. I have a source who says she's been asking questions about you around town. She knows you didn't go quietly to Sunset Manor, and that's making her nervous." The next morning brought the confrontation Helena had been expecting. She was in the cottage's garden with Margaret, planting late-season chrysanthemums. When Dylan's BMW pulled into the driveway, her son emerged from the car like a man approaching a hostile negotiation, his jaw set and his eyes cold. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Mother?" Helena stood slowly, brushing soil from her gardening gloves. "I'm planting flowers, Dylan. Perhaps you remember, I used to have beautiful gardens before your wife stole my home." "Don't be dramatic. Isabel didn't steal anything. Dad left the house to me, and you know it." "Do I?" Helena walked to the cottage's front porch, forcing Dylan to follow her. From her purse, she withdrew a tablet computer, another recent purchase that had required Margaret's help to master, and opened the video file. "I think you should see this." For 23 minutes, Dylan watched his father's final message in complete silence. Helena studied her son's face as Robert's words washed over him, watching denial give way to confusion and finally to a dawning horror that might have been genuine. When the video ended, Dylan sat in stunned silence for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "This can't be true. Isabel loves me. She couldn't. Your father documented everything. Dylan, Emma Sterling has been investigating similar cases across 3 states. Your wife is a serial killer who has been murdering elderly victims for years." "No." Dylan stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "I don't believe it. Dad was sick, paranoid. You're both trying to destroy my marriage because you never liked Isabel." "Dylan, please. She warned me this might happen. She said you and Dad never accepted her, that you'd try to turn me against her." Dylan's voice rose with each word. "I won't let you destroy the only good thing in my life because you can't accept that Dad chose to leave his property to his son instead of his wife." Helena felt her heart breaking as she watched her son choose his killer wife over his own family. "Dylan, I'm trying to save your life. If she's done this to 9 other victims—" "Stop!" Dylan backed toward his car, his face a mask of fury and pain. "I won't listen to any more of this insanity. Stay away from me. Mother, stay away from both of us. And if you keep spreading these lies about Isabel, I'll make sure you're committed to a psychiatric facility where you belong." As Dylan's car disappeared down Maple Street, Helena felt Margaret's steady presence beside her. "He'll realize the truth eventually," Margaret said quietly. "The question is whether it will be in time to save his life." Helena nodded, but privately, she wondered if Dylan's realization would come too late for all of them. Isabel now knew that Helena possessed Robert's evidence and was actively working against her. The killer would have to act soon to protect herself. The battle for justice was about to begin in earnest, and Helena could only hope that Moonlight Cottage would prove strong enough to shelter them all from the storm that was coming. That evening, as Helena locked the cottage's doors and windows, she found herself thinking about the insurance policy Dylan had increased just months before Robert's death. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental, which meant either Dylan was an innocent pawn in Isabel's game or he was a willing participant in his father's murder. Helena prayed for the former, but prepared for the latter. In a game of life and death, trust was a luxury she could no longer afford, even when it came to her own son. FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez arrived at Moonlight Cottage on a gray Wednesday morning, her credentials gleaming silver in the autumn sunlight. Emma Sterling had made good on her promise to involve federal authorities, and Agent Martinez's presence signaled that the investigation had reached a new level of seriousness. "Ms. Ravenswood," Agent Martinez said as they sat in the cottage's living room, "Emma Sterling has briefed me on your situation. We've been tracking a pattern of suspicious deaths across multiple states for the past 2 years. The woman you know as Isabel Cross is our primary suspect in what we believe is a systematic murder scheme targeting wealthy, elderly victims." Helena poured tea with steady hands, grateful for Margaret's presence beside her on the sofa. "How many victims are you investigating?" "Currently, 12 confirmed deaths with suspicious circumstances. The financial losses total over $4 million. Agent Martinez opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick file. "The problem is evidence. This killer is extremely sophisticated. She varies her methods, maintains believable relationships with her victims, and leaves very little physical evidence behind. But you have Robert's video, his research, which any competent defense attorney would dismiss as the paranoid delusions of a man suffering from medical distress." Agent Martinez's honesty was brutal, but necessary. "We need more concrete evidence. Ideally, we need her to incriminate herself." "What are you proposing?" Agent Martinez leaned forward, her expression grave. "We want you to become bait." The plan was both elegant and terrifying. Helena would approach Dylan and Isabel, ostensibly to reconcile and accept defeat. She would suggest a meeting at attorney Thomas Mitchell's office to sign papers transferring her remaining assets to Dylan. The meeting would be monitored, with Helena wearing a wire to record any incriminating statements. "The risk is significant," Agent Martinez warned. "If Isabel suspects a trap, she might escalate to immediate violence. We'll have agents positioned nearby, but your safety cannot be guaranteed." Helena thought of Robert's final words, "You're stronger than you know." She thought of Lily and Sophie sleeping safely upstairs, of Margaret tending the garden that had become a symbol of renewal and hope. Some battles were worth the risk. "I'll do it." The next 48 hours were spent in careful preparation. Helena practiced her role, rehearsing the defeated widow's acceptance of her circumstances. Agent Martinez's technical team fitted her with recording equipment so small it was virtually undetectable. Thomas Mitchell, Robert's longtime friend and attorney, agreed to host the meeting despite his obvious misgivings. "Robert spoke to me about his concerns regarding Isabel." Thomas confided the evening before the scheduled meeting. He suspected she was manipulating his medication, but he died before he could present me with concrete evidence. I've been haunted by the possibility that I could have prevented his death. Helena squeezed the elderly lawyer's hand. Robert knew the risks he was taking. He chose to gather evidence rather than make accusations he couldn't prove. Tomorrow, We'll honor his memory by ensuring his killer faces justice. But Thursday morning brought a phone call that shattered their carefully laid plans. Helena's phone rang at 6 a.m., jolting her from restless sleep. Isabel's voice was honey-sweet and deadly calm. "Good morning. Helena, I trust you slept well?" Helena's blood turned to ice. Beside her bed, the emergency button that would summon FBI backup seemed impossibly far away. "Isabel, how did you get this number? I make it my business to know things, Mother dear. For instance, I know you've been very busy lately, meeting with journalists, talking to federal agents, filling your little cottage with strays and sob stories." Isabel's voice carried an undertone of amusement that made Helena's skin crawl. "I know about the video Robert made before his unfortunate passing. Such a creative man, your husband, though ultimately not creative enough." Helena forced herself to remain calm. "What do you want?" "I want you to listen very carefully. I have something that belongs to you, or rather, someone. Little Sophie Foster is such a sweet child. Isn't she so trusting, so vulnerable? It would be tragic if something happened to her because her mother's protector made poor choices." Helena's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a cry of horror. "You're lying." "Am I? Perhaps you should check her room." Helena ran to the cottage's second floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sophie's bed was empty, the window standing open to let in the morning chill. On the pillow lay a single photograph, Sophie, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. "She's alive, for now," Isabel continued when Helena returned to the phone. "But her continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation. You have 2 hours to come to Ravenswood Manor. Come alone. Bring no weapons, no recording devices, no backup. You'll sign whatever documents I require, transferring all remaining assets to Dylan. After that, well, we'll see how generous I'm feeling. Let me talk to Sophie. I need to know she's alive." "Oh, she's alive. But not for long if you test my patience. 2 hours. Helena, don't be late." The line went dead, leaving Helena staring at the phone in her trembling hands. She ran to Lily's room, finding the young doctor collapsed on the floor, a syringe beside her. Lily was unconscious but breathing. Whatever Isabel had injected her with was designed to incapacitate, not kill. Helena called 911 for an ambulance, then faced the most difficult decision of her life. She could contact Agent Martinez, bring in the FBI, and potentially save herself. But any official response would likely result in Sophie's death. Isabel had proven herself capable of killing children to achieve her goals. Margaret found her in the kitchen 20 minutes later, staring at the phone with tears streaming down her face. "She has Sophie," Helena whispered. "She'll kill her if I don't cooperate." Margaret sat down heavily, her own face pale with shock. "What are you going to do?" Helena thought of the little girl who had slowly begun to smile again in the safety of Moonlight Cottage. She thought of Lily, who had trusted her to provide sanctuary for her daughter. She thought of Robert's voice on that video. "Don't let them win." "I'm going to get her back," Helena said, her voice steady despite her terror. "And I'm going to end this once and for all." But as she prepared to face the woman who had murdered her husband and destroyed her family, Helena couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap from which none of them would emerge alive. Isabel had always been one step ahead, always anticipated their moves. The cottage that had been their sanctuary might become their tomb, and the battle for justice might claim more innocent lives before it was over. The clock was ticking, and Sophie's life hung in the balance. Helena Ravenswood, who had once been content to tend her garden and trust in others, was about to discover just how far she would go to protect the family she had chosen. Helena drove to Ravenswood Manor through streets that seemed foreign despite 40 years of familiarity. Every turn brought back memories: the corner where Dylan had crashed his bicycle at age 7, the park where Robert had proposed on an autumn evening much like this one, the library where she'd spent countless afternoons reading to local children. All of it felt like artifacts from someone else's life, relics of an innocence that Isabel had systematically destroyed. The manor loomed before her like a monument to betrayal, its windows glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. Helena had once loved this house, had raised her son within its walls, and grown old with her husband in its rooms. Now it felt like entering a predator's lair. She parked in the circular driveway and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Hidden in her coat pocket was a small digital recorder, not the sophisticated FBI equipment, but a simple device she'd purchased at an electronics store. If she was going to die today, she would at least try to leave evidence behind. Isabel opened the front door before Helena could knock, her smile as radiant and false as ever. She wore a cream-colored sweater that made her look innocent and domestic. The perfect wife and stepmother. Only her eyes revealed the predator beneath the facade. "Helena, how wonderful to see you. Please, come in. We have so much to discuss." The front hall felt smaller than Helena remembered, oppressive with shadows and the weight of accumulated secrets. Family photographs still lined the walls, images of Dylan's childhood, her wedding to Robert, 3 generations of Ravenswood family gatherings. Isabel had left them in place, perhaps understanding that their presence would make Helena's psychological torture more complete. "Where is Sophie?" "Safe and sound. I assure you, she's such a well-behaved child, though I do worry about her mother's influence. Dr. Foster has filled that little girl's head with such paranoid nonsense about domestic violence." Isabel led Helena into the living room, where a laptop computer sat open on the coffee table beside a stack of legal documents. "Please, sit. We have business to conclude." Helena remained standing, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of Sophie. "I want to see her first." "I'm afraid that's not possible just yet. You see, dear, there's been a slight change in our arrangement." Isabel's voice carried a note of amusement that made Helena's skin crawl. "Sophie won't be joining us for our little reunion." "What do you mean? The child became difficult. When I collected her from the cottage this morning, she attempted to run away. Children can be so unpredictable when they're frightened." Isabel touched her throat in a gesture of mock distress. "I'm afraid Sophie suffered a terrible accident during her escape attempt. These old houses have such dangerous staircases." Helena felt the world tilt around her. No, you're lying." "No." "Am I? Perhaps you'd like to see for yourself." Isabel gestured toward the laptop screen, which showed a video feed from what appeared to be the manor's basement. Sophie lay motionless on the concrete floor, her small body twisted at an unnatural angle. "She fought so bravely, the poor dear, just like her mother." Helena's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the sofa as the full horror of the situation hit her. Sophie, bright, resilient Sophie, who had begun to trust again, was dead. And Helena had walked into this trap knowing she couldn't save the child, but hoping against hope that Isabel might show mercy. "You monster," Helena whispered. "Monster. How dramatic. I prefer to think of myself as a problem solver." Isabel settled into the armchair across from Helena, her posture relaxed and confident. "You see, Helena, you've caused me considerable inconvenience over the past few weeks. The journalist, the FBI agent, that ridiculous cottage, all of it could have been avoided if you'd simply accepted your circumstances gracefully. The way your other victims did." Isabel's smile widened. "Ah, so you know about the others." "Yes, I've had a rather successful career. 12 previous clients, each one a valuable learning experience. You'd be surprised how many lonely, wealthy people are desperately seeking companionship in their final years. You're confessing to murder. I'm sharing professional insights with a colleague. Isabel leaned forward, her eyes bright with a madness that had been hidden beneath years of careful performance. Because you see, Helena, you're going to be my final client. After tonight, Isabella Martinez will disappear forever, and your dear Dylan will inherit everything: the manor, the investments, the insurance money. He'll grieve appropriately, of course, but he'll also be a very wealthy widower. Helena forced herself to focus despite her grief and terror. The recorder in her pocket was capturing every word, but that would only matter if someone survived to present it as evidence. Dylan doesn't know, does he, about the murders? Dylan knows what he needs to know. He knows his father was becoming paranoid and unstable. He knows you've been spreading vicious lies about his loving wife. He knows that his inheritance is being threatened by a bitter old woman who can't accept reality. Isabel's voice hardened. What he doesn't know is that his father was much more perceptive than I anticipated. Robert discovered my previous relationships and began asking uncomfortable questions. So, you killed him. I helped him find peace. The withdrawal of his blood pressure medication was quite painless. I'm told, a gradual weakening followed by a merciful stroke, much kinder than what I have planned for you. Helena's mind raced, seeking some advantage, some weapon she could use against this monster. The FBI knows about you. Agent Martinez has files on all your victims. Even if you kill me, they'll catch you eventually. Perhaps, but by then, Isabella Martinez will be dead too, another tragic victim of your violent mental breakdown. Isabel opened a small leather case on the coffee table, revealing several syringes filled with clear liquid. Insulin overdose, quite effective for someone your age, and completely untraceable if administered properly. The beauty is that it will look like you injected yourself in a fit of diabetic confusion. I'm not diabetic. You will be, posthumously. Medical records are surprisingly easy to falsify when you know the right people. Isabel selected one of the syringes, holding it up to the light. Don't worry, Helena. It will be quick, much more merciful than what I had originally planned. Helena's hand moved slowly toward her pocket, toward the emergency alert device Agent Martinez had given her as a backup. But Isabel noticed the movement and laughed. Oh, please, do you think I'm an amateur? I've already disabled your little panic button. The signal jammer I installed this morning is quite effective. Isabel stood and moved toward Helena, the syringe gleaming in her hand. Now, shall we get this over with? I have a grieving widow to perform for the authorities. But as Isabel raised the syringe, Helena lunged forward with desperate strength. The two women crashed into the coffee table, legal documents scattering across the floor as they fought for control of the deadly weapon. Despite her age, Helena fought with the fury of a woman who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "You killed my husband," Helena screamed, her fingers clawing at Isabel's wrist. "You destroyed my family." "Your family destroyed itself," Isabel snarled back, her mask of civility finally slipping completely. "Robert was a weak old man, and Dylan is a pathetic mama's boy. I did the world a favor by removing them from the gene pool." The syringe skittered across the hardwood floor as they rolled together. 68-year-old Helena matching 38-year-old Isabel's strength through pure desperation. But Helena's arthritis and Isabel's youth began to tell. And slowly the younger woman gained the upper hand. "This is pointless," Isabel panted, pinning Helena's arms to the floor. "You can't win. You're an old woman playing a young woman's game." But Helena had been buying time, not trying to win. Her thrashing had brought her close to the antique brass lamp that had sat on Robert's end table for 20 years. With her last burst of strength, she grabbed the lamp's heavy base and swung it at Isabel's head. The impact sent Isabel sprawling, blood streaming from a gash above her left ear. Helena struggled to her feet, her body screaming with pain, and stumbled toward the front door. But Isabel recovered faster than expected, launching herself at Helena's back and sending them both crashing through the glass coffee table. "Enough!" Isabel screamed. Her composure completely shattered. Blood matted her dark hair, and her cream sweater was torn and stained. "You want to know the truth? Yes, I killed them all, your precious Robert. The lonely widows, the pathetic old men who thought a pretty young woman could love them. They were all so easy, so trusting, and now you're going to join them." Helena lay among the glass shards, feeling warm blood soaking through her clothes. But through the pain and fear, she realized that Isabel's screaming confession was being recorded by more than just her hidden device. The front door stood open, and in the doorway stood Agent Martinez and 2 other FBI agents, their weapons drawn. "Isabella Martinez, you're under arrest for multiple counts of first-degree murder," Agent Martinez announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Step away from Mrs. Ravenswood and put your hands where we can see them." For a moment, Isabel froze like a deer in headlights. Then her face twisted into a snarl of pure rage. "She's lying. This old woman attacked me. I was defending myself." "We heard your confession," Agent Martinez said calmly. "The entire conversation has been recorded. You're done." Isabel's shoulders sagged as the reality of her situation sank in. The game she had played so successfully for years had finally come to an end. As the agents moved to restrain her, she looked down at Helena with something that might have been respect. "You're tougher than I expected," she said quietly. "Robert would be proud." "He would be proud that justice is finally being served," Helena replied, accepting Agent Martinez's help to stand. "And he would be proud that his son will finally know the truth." As Isabel was led away in handcuffs, Helena felt a mixture of triumph and profound sadness. Justice had been served, but at such a terrible cost. Sophie was dead, Lily was hospitalized, and Dylan would have to live with the knowledge that he had chosen his father's killer over his own mother. The manor that had once been filled with love and laughter now felt like a crime scene, tainted by violence and betrayal. But Helena was alive, and the truth had finally come to light. Sometimes that was the best victory an old woman could hope for. 6 months after that terrible night at Ravenswood Manor, Helena stood in the garden behind Moonlight Cottage, watching Margaret plant roses in the morning sunlight. The cottage had become something more than either of them had imagined, not just a refuge for women in crisis, but a symbol of resilience and renewal. The trial of Isabella Martinez had been swift and decisive, faced with overwhelming evidence, including Helena's recording and the testimony of multiple FBI agents. Isabella's attorney had negotiated a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 12 counts of first-degree murder. During the trial, the full scope of Isabella's crimes had been revealed. FBI investigators had traced her activities across 7 states and 15 years, uncovering a trail of death and financial devastation that stretched back to her early 20s. The total number of victims was eventually confirmed at 17, with financial losses exceeding $6 million. Dylan had testified against his wife, his voice breaking as he described the psychological manipulation and emotional abuse that had blinded him to her true nature. The revelation that Isabella had murdered his father and had planned to murder his mother had shattered his world completely. But in that shattering, Helena had found her son again. "I failed you," Dylan had said the day after Isabella's sentencing, sitting in the same living room where Helena had nearly died. "I chose her over my own family. I let her poison my mind against you and Dad. She was very skilled at manipulation," Helena had replied, taking her son's hand. "She fooled all of us for a long time. What matters now is that we rebuild what she tried to destroy." The rebuilding had been slow but steady. Dylan had moved back to town, taking a position with a law firm that specialized in elder abuse cases. He donated his time to Moonlight Cottage, helping other families navigate the legal complexities of financial exploitation and domestic violence. It was his way of atoning for the months when he had been complicit in his father's murder. Dr. Lily Foster had recovered from the sedative Isabella had injected her with, but the loss of Sophie had left wounds that would never fully heal. She had chosen to stay in town, opening a small practice and volunteering at the cottage on quiet evenings. Helena would find her in Sophie's old room, sometimes talking to the empty air as if her daughter were still there. "She would have been 9 next month," Lily said one evening as they sat together on the cottage's front porch. "I keep thinking about the birthday party we'll never have, the Christmas presents I'll never wrap." Helena had no words that could ease such grief. Instead, she simply held Lily's hand and let her cry, understanding that some losses were too profound for comfort. The cottage itself had grown beyond Helena's original vision. Emma Sterling's book about the Isabella Martinez case had become a bestseller, and the publicity had brought national attention to the problem of elder abuse and domestic violence. Donations poured in from around the country, allowing Helena to expand the program and hire professional counselors and social workers. Margaret had proven to be a gifted administrator, her own experience with family betrayal giving her unique insight into the needs of the women who sought shelter at Moonlight Cottage. Under her direction, the cottage had developed programs for financial literacy, legal advocacy, and trauma counseling. The waiting list for beds had grown to 6 months, a testament to both the program's success and the enormous need it addressed. On this particular morning, Helena was expecting a special visitor. Sheriff James Crawford had called the day before to say that someone wanted to meet her, someone whose story had been touched by the Isabella Martinez case. The visitor turned out to be an elderly man named Walter Brennan, whose sister had been one of Isabella's early victims in Ohio. Walter was in his 70s, with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly as he introduced himself. "I wanted to thank you," he said, as they sat in the cottage's living room. "My sister Marie was killed 3 years ago by that monster. The police said it was natural causes, and I couldn't prove otherwise. When she was arrested and confessed, I finally got closure. I finally knew what happened to Marie." Helena poured tea and listened as Walter talked about his sister, a retired teacher who had met Isabella at a community center and had been charmed by the younger woman's apparent kindness and attention. Within 6 months, Marie was dead, and her life savings had disappeared. "I've started a foundation in Marie's name," Walter continued. "We're working to educate seniors about the warning signs of financial exploitation and emotional abuse. I was hoping you might consider partnering with us. Your cottage has become famous, and your voice carries weight." Helena was honored by the request, and over the following hours, they discussed ways their organizations could work together. It felt like Robert's final gift, the ability to turn their personal tragedy into something that might protect other families from similar devastation. As Walter prepared to leave, he handed Helena a small wrapped package. Inside was a photograph of Marie Brennan, a woman in her 70s with bright eyes and a warm smile, standing in a garden much like the one behind Moonlight Cottage. "She loved roses," Walter said quietly. "I thought you might plant one in her memory." That evening, as the sun set behind the cottage's trees, Helena and Margaret planted Marie's rosebush in the memorial garden they had created for Isabella's victims. 17 roses now grew there, each one representing a life cut short by one woman's greed and cruelty. Dylan arrived as they were finishing, carrying a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers, not for the memorial garden, but for the cottage's kitchen table. It had become their tradition, these quiet Sunday dinners where their chosen family gathered to share food and stories and the simple comfort of each other's company. Lily joined them, as she always did. And for a few hours they were able to push aside the darkness that had brought them together and focus on the light they had created. They talked about the cottage's newest residents, about Margaret's plans for expanding the vegetable garden, about Dylan's latest case involving a family whose grandfather had been swindled out of his retirement savings. As the evening wound down and their guests prepared to leave, Helena found herself standing once again in the memorial garden. The roses were thriving, their blooms bright against the gathering darkness. She thought about Robert, about the video message that had started her on this journey. She thought about Sophie, whose laughter would never again echo through the cottage's halls. She thought about all the victims whose stories had become part of her own. "You were right," she whispered to Robert's memory. "I was stronger than I knew." But the strength hadn't come from her alone. It had come from Margaret's steadfast loyalty, from Emma's dedication to uncovering the truth, from Agent Martinez's pursuit of justice, and even from Dylan's eventual courage to testify against the woman he had loved. It had come from the community of survivors who had gathered at Moonlight Cottage, each one contributing their own strength to the whole. The cottage itself had become a beacon of hope in a world where too many elderly victims suffered in silence, where too many families were torn apart by manipulative predators who exploited love and trust for personal gain. Helena knew that Isabella Martinez was in prison, that her reign of terror was over. But she also knew that there were others like her out there, and there would always be vulnerable people who needed protection. As she turned to go back inside, Helena caught sight of a car pulling into the driveway. A young woman emerged, carrying a suitcase and holding the hand of a small boy. Another family seeking shelter, another story of survival and resilience about to begin. Helena smiled and walked toward them, ready to offer the same sanctuary that had saved her own life. The battle against predators like Isabella Martinez would never truly end. But each person they saved, each family they helped rebuild, was a victory against the darkness. In the cottage's warm lights, she could see Margaret preparing the guest room and Lily setting out toys for the little boy. Their chosen family was ready to expand once again, to wrap another set of survivors in the protective embrace of Moonlight Cottage. Helena Ravenswood had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from building something larger than yourself, a community of healing, a fortress of hope, a place where broken people can come together and discover that they are stronger than they ever imagined. The roses in the memorial garden would continue to bloom, honoring the dead while nurturing the living. And in that eternal cycle of loss and renewal, Helena had found her purpose and her peace. The game that Isabella Martinez had played so ruthlessly was finally over. But the work of healing and protection would continue for as long as there were people brave enough to fight for justice and compassionate enough to offer sanctuary to those who needed it most. In the end, that was Robert's true legacy, not the manor that had been tainted by murder, but the cottage that had become a beacon of hope. And Helena knew that as long as she lived, she would keep that beacon burning bright